Doctors and nurses have read it who have delivered babies to mothers who clearly cheated on their husbands. What was that like? Story 1. My brother had a surprise baby this way. He and his co-worker had a one-night stand while she was broken up with her ex. She gets back with her ex, ends up pregnant, and flash forward to the delivery day. The day my brother sends me a picture of a random baby out of the blue and says, "I think I'm a dad." She is white, her boyfriend is black, and my brother is white. And the baby came out looking very, very white. I don't know how it went down in the hospital room, but I know they separated very soon after. My brother went to visit her in the hospital and asked her if she would let him take a paternity test. She agreed, and it came back positive a week later. And that's how I got a surprise nephew. My brother took full responsibility from day one, and they ended up dating, having another child together, and are now separated with full split custody, with no courts involved. Story 2. My dad is blonde and my mom is brunette. I came out of the womb with fiery red hair. My dad's mom made a huge fuss about my mom cheating on my dad and had to be escorted out of the hospital. My grandmother's own mother had flaming red hair, which she apparently forgot until my great-grandmother held me for the first time and said, "I always wanted a baby with red hair." My dad's mom accused my mom of cheating, forgetting that my dad's grandmother had red hair. She was in her 80s, late in life babies are actually common in my dad's family, and spent her entire life in rural Alabama and Mississippi, so she wasn't exactly a biologist or a geneticist. Additionally, she was extremely mentally ill, and these delusional temper tantrums were not uncommon. Story 3. I have a white friend who is a superman of a dad. When his third child was born, she was obviously of mixed race. His white wife had had an affair with a black man. The wife also had substance abuse issues before this pregnancy and was no longer dependable or stable as a mother. So my friend immediately divorced her and took custody of the kids. All of them. He's been raising his 2 bio kids and the third child, who isn't technically his, for the past decade. She's his princess and he loves her exactly like the other 2. He's a straight man who is not remarried, and he's done this all on his own. Dated here and there, but nothing serious yet. He's too busy with 3 kids, a full-time career, and a small business to run. Also, the bio dad to the third child waived his rights immediately when he found out about her birth. He was mom's dealer, and their fling was a one-time thing that resulted in the pregnancy. He had zero interest in fatherhood. Some people will say that they could never raise another man's child, especially one that was the product of adultery. But you have to consider that my friend went through the entire pregnancy preparing for this baby that he thought was his. So he bought the baby gear, painted a nursery, went to the doctor appointments, etc. He was heavily invested in this baby before she was ever born. He already loved her and felt she was his, so it wasn't a big leap for him to take her on as his own. Story 4. A friend of mine tells the story of his aunt giving birth, in the 1970s or 80s, to a baby that at first glance appeared to be of Asian descent. Aunt and her husband are both Caucasian, Midwesterners from long lines of the same sort, going back to Germany. There was evidently a shocked moment, and then the aunt's father, my father's grandfather, quipped, "Well, they say 1 in 7 babies is born Chinese," and everyone laughed. The tension broke long enough for the doctor, also a white Midwesterner of German stock, to say that likely the kid's colour is just off due to the events of the birth. The baby is now a man in his 30s or 40s, and looks like a typical Midwesterner. He just had some tinge to his skin for a few hours following the birth, plus some dark hair at birth that had since lightened up. Story 5. Probably going to get buried, but still want to share. Not my story, it's the story of my dad's friend. In high school, my dad's friend, Carl, was always into this girl, Cindy, but she was always dating this one guy, Jimmy. Jimmy breaks up with Cindy and she goes off the rails sleeping with everyone. Carl sees it as a chance to be the good guy and starts dating her. I'm not sure, but they either had a Ross and Rachel thing where they kept on breaking up and getting back together, she broke up with him, or she was always cheating on him, especially if Jimmy was hinting at them getting back together. They never did though, and he'd just sleep with her. But Carl never listened to my dad or his friends because of blind love. She was perfect in his eyes. So high school is over and Carl goes to the army. They weren't officially dating, but every time he was able to come back, he'd end up with her for a night or 2. My dad and his friends knew that she was sleeping around the whole time, but Carl didn't care. Eventually, while he was still serving, she convinced him that they were dating again. He proposed to her and she looked around for a house for them that he paid for with his army money. He comes back for good and they get married. A year later, they have a beautiful baby girl together. The baby girl is his everything. The guy grew up a migrant worker and now he has his high school sweetheart, a home, a decent job, and his own little princess. 5 years later, his wife gets pregnant again. This time she has a baby boy. Now he has to start working more to be able to care for the new baby, while mom continues to be a stay-at-home mom. When the son is around 2 and the girl is around 7, he comes home with divorce papers and all his clothes packed up. Turns out that the lovely house the wife had to have was because it made her next-door neighbor to Jimmy. This entire time she was still sleeping with him, despite him also having a partner. The little girl and baby boy Carl thought were his weren't. They were Jimmy's kids, and Cindy knew it. Jimmy's partner had left him, so he finally wanted to be a family man, and Cindy jumped at the chance, kicking out Carl and divorcing him. He went into a depression and ended up losing his job because of it. I'm not sure what happened after that, but I hope Carl found a nice, loving girl in the end. I just wanted to add that this was a story. It really did happen. That my dad told me when my ex-boyfriend cheated on me, and I was thinking about getting back together with him again, because he was oh so sorry. My dad had to watch as his friend went through all of this, and they couldn't do anything because he didn't want to be saved. He didn't want the same thing to happen to me, so that is why he talked to me about this when I was 14 and dated a known player. My parents are very big on learning from my mistakes, and I'm very grateful for that. Though in this instance it was learn from my friend's mistakes. Especially since, had I not been told this, I would have had this exact same thing happen to me, but with him having kids with other women. So to those people saying things like, he was asking for it, and how could he get her to respect himself when not even he did? You're right. If all your friends are telling you someone isn't good for you, listen to them. I know it can be very confusing. Firstly, Carl stopped serving right before they got married, but he still worked a job that requires long hours, and Cindy was a stay-at-home mom, so she still had plenty of time to cheat, even though he wasn't gone for months or weeks on end. Secondly, I was pretty young when my dad told me this, so I didn't think to ask how come he never thought it was weird that their neighbor happened to be Cindy's ex, whom she frequently left him for in high school. I just thought he must have thought it was one hell of a coincidence. As people might say, it's hard to see the truth when wearing rose-colored glasses. Third, as for the house situation, that's also foggy. I'm not sure if he felt bad about having to kick them out. I think Jimmy was only renting the house next door. If he thought letting her have the house would make her change her mind, even though they used his money to buy it, it was under her name. Fourth, I think he still tried to be in the kid's life after, but neither of their birth parents wanted him to. And despite the fact that he did truly love them, he just could look at them without being reminded of what happened. Story 6. My wife's best friend is a doctor who delivers babies, and a couple of stories came in. She delivered one baby with the father and mother were acting really awkward, but he was around during labor, and when it came time to push, the man just walked out and left the room. Apparently the issue was that they were just friends and he lived in another state with his wife and kids. Another woman had an affair with her cousin's husband and got pregnant, calling him her fiancé. Her own husband died during this period and it prompted her to go out and sleep with a few other one-night stands. At this point she tried to get an abortion, but she was turned away because she was overweight and hypertensive, making the procedure too risky. She never followed up with a doctor and gained weight to over 400 pounds. It was too late for an abortion at this point and she'd been taking medication for the hypertensive thing, and the medication can cause death or deformities. When she delivered, it took the entire staff to prevent her from having a stroke. And the baby's kidneys. Do they work? No one knows. Most of the stories are that the man cheated. If the mother cheats, there's no real reason to bring it up, so they don't really know. Lots of having to tell a mother who has only slept with one man that she and her baby have chlamydia. No weird stories of white babies to black parents or vice versa. Story 7. We had a very sweet blonde-haired, blue-eyed mom and dad, along with their entire extended family in the room for a delivery one busy afternoon at work. Think aunts, uncles, cousins, grandma, and grandpa too. The baby is born, and as the doctor places her on the mom's chest, the first words out of her mouth are, "That's not my baby. That's not my baby." The baby in question, still attached to the umbilical cord, has beautiful dark curly black hair and dark skin. The nurse looks at her and tells her that this is definitely her baby because she's still attached to you. And she, not so quietly, tells the nurse, "There's no way. I never slept with a black man. It's not mine." The father is standing there silent, unsure what to do. And a long, awkward silence fills the room. We clean her and the baby up as cheerfully as we can. We see the extended family filter out to the room and the father leave to get a cigarette. About 10 minutes later, a tall black guy walks up to our front desk, asking how to get to the patient in question's room. Story 8. This isn't exactly what you're looking for, but my mom is black and my dad is white. My mom had kids with her first husband, who was black, and they were born somewhat light-skinned, which is common among black children. So she was expecting this. But when she gave birth to my eldest full brother, she thought that something was wrong because of how pale he was. The nurse says that happens and he will get colour. Fast forward to when it's time for them to go home, and the nurses that are now on duty refuse to let her go because obviously there had been some sort of mix-up. She was literally accused of trying to steal a white baby. And even with my dad there, apparently, this kid was still too white to be mixed race. This was the early 80s, so crazy stuff went down in hospitals. Mind you, we lived in an area where mixed race families were non-existent at the time. Another fast forward, 16 years and my brother has a mountain biking accident and a traumatic brain injury. He's literally hanging on by a thread. His friend calls and my mom rushes over to the hospital. His friend is literally there saying, yes, this is his mom, and she has her ID. Bro didn't have an ID though, and they are refusing to let her in. They're asking for clarification if he's adopted or something, but apparently the truth was the wrong answer. Hospital security escorted her out and she had to have my dad come, who, by the way, was just let right in. I highly doubt under any other circumstance that they would erroneously not let a parent see their injured child because they don't look like them. But my mom being black with a very light-skinned child was apparently an issue. But anyway, back to the question. I wonder how many families have had drama thanks to the genetics being so unpredictable. If my mom was white with a black husband, I'm certain everyone would think she cheated on my dad with a white guy. Heck, people even accused my mom of using an egg donor. Sometimes genes even skip generations, so a trait that hasn't popped up in a few generations can randomly show up. Story 9. I already made a comment, but I do have a story about a close call of this nature. So a few years ago, I responded to an ad of the NSFW nature. I was feeling adventurous. Of a request for a man to fulfill a cuckold fantasy. Basically, they wanted a man who looked similar to the boyfriend of the couple to the girlfriend while the boyfriend watched. There was a whole act about it. She'd call me by his name, I'd act clearly different and more sexually aggressive than him, let the lie slip up a few times and badly cover it, which she'd buy it 100%. You know, make a whole act about it, like playing out a porn script. Anyway, the deed is done and 9 months later I get a call from the girlfriend. She's pregnant and expecting within the week, and they worried that I might be the father. I did use a condom, but she wasn't on the pill, and the paranoia was understandable. Also, they didn't have sex for a week before and a couple of weeks after, so the timing matched up. The baby came out, and either of us could be the father, as it vaguely looks like both of us. It was a boy, by the way. Naturally, it was tense and awkward as hell. It took a week for the DNA test to get back, and the delay was agonizing. Thankfully, it came back that I was in the clear. There was actually a bit of a celebration. When I got the word, I cheered. They hugged, and I gave them both a handshake and a hug, said my congratulations, went home, and drank a whole damn bottle of Absolute vodka to celebrate. Story 10. Okay, I am a nurse, but this isn't a story about a birth I witnessed. It was my own birth. And although my mother definitely didn't cheat, all the midwives were convinced she had. And yeah, it'll be buried, but I think it's a funny story, so I'm going to share. For background, my mother, Janice, is white, and I got married young to another white guy, Dan. Actually forced to by my grandparents, who were horrified she was living in sin. Their relationship petered out and they separated, but remained very good friends. Then she met my father, Alex, a black man, and began a relationship with him. Mum was still married at the time, and neither she nor my husband was in a hurry to get divorced, and he became good friends with my mum's new partner, my dad. Mum fell pregnant with me, and time moves along. She goes into labor and she needs to head up to the hospital. Dad was working and couldn't make it home in time to get her there, so still being good friends with her husband, she rings him and he comes around to drive her to the hospital and decides to go hang out until I'm born. After an hour or so, Dad arrives. He was freaking out a bit, so his best friend, Harry, also a black guy, drove him because Dad didn't trust himself. They arrive at the hospital right as Mum is ready to deliver. The midwives come out to the waiting room to grab the husband to be there when the baby is born. They knew the mum's actual husband, Dan, had been driven there, so they assumed that he was the father of the baby. Went and grabbed him and tried to drag him into the delivery room. He freaked out and yelled, No, I'm not the father, I'm just the husband. The father is Aboriginal. Dad and Harry pulled up into the car park as this is happening, and Dad leaps out the car. Decides he needs to have a quick smoke to settle his nerves before he goes in. His best friend Harry doesn't smoke cigarettes, but does smoke weed and is pretty stoned. So he walks in ahead. Just then, the midwives come running back to the waiting room to grab the actual father and see the only black guy in there. Obviously him, right? So they take him and suit him up to bring him down to the delivery. Being pretty stoned, Harry doesn't question this and just goes along with it. The midwives reach the delivery room and shove him inside. Mum, legs in stirrups, and at the pushing stage goes absolutely ballistic. Not that black guy, he's not the father, go get the other one. The midwives hustle Harry out and return him to the waiting room to wait with Dan. Alex, my dad, has come inside by now and the midwives marched up to him and said something like, I hope you're the father this time, otherwise I'm gonna just have to give up and she can birth alone. So that's the story about how the hospital went through 3 different men before they finally got to my actual father. Story 11. Obligatory, not a doctor or nurse, but this situation happened in my extended family. My aunt and uncle had 2 kids, both towhead blondes. My aunt is blonde, my uncle has light brown hair, and they have their 3rd kid who has the darkest, curliest hair you have ever seen. My uncle thought my aunt cheated on him with a literal milkman. Apparently that guy had dark curly hair. Bad luck. Turns out my uncle's mom had dark curly hair when she was born and throughout her childhood, but started colouring her hair blonde and straightening it when she was a teen. My uncle never knew his mother's natural hair or texture, and there were very few pictures of her as a young girl, so he didn't know it wasn't her natural hair. Thankfully, when my aunt and uncle's marriage was on the rocks, my grandma casually mentioned how much this girl would hate her hair when she grew you and would colour straighten it, just like she had. Uncle had a sigh of relief, and all has been good since then. By the way, my cousin does not dye or straighten her hair. Guess grandma was wrong. Story 12. I got a weird one. My previous neighbour was a nurse and delivered one where a buddy of mine was involved. A buddy of mine knew she came in with his girlfriend who was in labour, and my buddy was clearly not keen on having a kid, but the mother didn't want an abortion and was madly in love with my buddy to a point that it was an obsession. So the girlfriend decided to keep it in order to keep him around. The girlfriend was properly paranoid, delusional, and a peg case that made my buddy's life hell for 18 months. He was at the point where he genuinely thought he might just run away or slip into depression and kill himself due to this woman. She insisted it was his and was expecting him to either marry her or, in her words, one of my mutual friends, if he won't love me, I'll just take him for all his money for the next 18 years. My neighbour said he looked like death while the baby was being delivered in the room. The baby comes out and my buddy and the girl, who were both English-Irish heritage, looked and saw a Pacific Islander baby. Turns out the girlfriend was sleeping with one of the local rugby players on the low who knocked her up. My neighbour said she has never seen someone who looked so emotionally and mentally broken do such a 180 in less than a minute. My neighbour looked back at him and he walked out of the room laughing maniacally with joy. She looked at my neighbour and said, "That's not mine. Thank f*** I'm free." She said he was spotted dancing down the hallway to the exit. My buddy's doing okay now. He got a nice, smoking hot South African girlfriend who he's been with for 3 years. They're looking to buy a house together and get married soon. His ex is now living with her parents in a small granny shack with the kids. The Pacific Islander baby daddy went MIA, missing in action. The last I heard is suspected to be hiding out on some island in his native Fiji. Can't blame the guy for leaving, and I personally hope he is never found.